the talk that I'm going to give today is about. Is that I am going to give you some ideas, but the ideas aren't useful in and of themselves. The ideas are prompts or prods to get you to think a little deeper about something. It's actually to challenge the ideas that you already have at the level of the framework that you use to understand, to dig down deeper, or actually go up a little higher and do a little bit of both of that. So that's the gist of it. The talk that I'm going to give today is called Trust in Wisdom, Harder Than You Think. And it's an interesting idea, and I'll show you this. I don't think it's quite big enough to see, but I don't know if anybody can. Does anybody know who that might be? No. It is Helen Keller. Very good. Excellent. Helen Keller came to mind recently when I was thinking about hard problems to solve, and I thought something about Helen Keller stood out to me as that was a phenomenal transformation that she made. Becoming deaf and blind at the age of 2 years old after a disease, and not having access to language as she grew up, but clearly intelligent, playful, willful. She had a lot of personality and a challenge on how to communicate with people around her. And her family was distraught and got a tutor to try to teach her a few things. The thing that was interesting is that if you know the story, she spent about a month, her tutor Anne spent about a month trying to get her to understand language in various ways of doing it, right? With sign language and vocal sounds and different manipulative ways of trying to give her the idea that there are names of things. And from Helen's perspective, I wonder what that was like, right? I am living a life, there's a stranger in my house who keeps grabbing my hand and doing stuff with me, and I don't want to do it, right? This is not what I'm asking for. So there's a lot of frustration there. But then, one day, when she puts her hand under water and signs the word for water in her hand, the light bulb goes off. Something happens in her mind. The connections are made between the synapses, and all of a sudden she understands, you just told me the name of something that I sometimes want. And after that, she was thirsty for wanting more language, right? Tell me more. What's this? What's this? And now the spark was made, and she was able to make a shift there. But the thing that was interesting about the way that happened for her is up till the point that this connection was made, it was noise. It was worse than noise. It was extremely annoying. It was very problematic for her. I mean, it was not what she wanted to do. And it was getting more intense the closer she got. So I think there's something in that we have that we can use as a way of understanding how we learn. So next image is the overflowing teacup. And of course the masters will say, how can I give you anything? Your mind is already full. And it's interesting to think that even Helen Keller's mind was full, right? Her mind was full of the way that she made sense of her world. One thing that she was reportedly the case for her is even as a young girl, she could tell who was walking in the room by the feeling of the vibration of their footsteps across the wooden floor. By the sound of the things that were around, and she could tell how many people were in the room, who was there, and so she had a sense. So it was evident that she could recognize what was going on. So with all of that going on, her mind was full. And when Anne was trying to teach her something, no room for this, I'm full. But once she got that concept, once she got the concept of language, it's almost as if all of that compresses in some way, and now there's almost infinite more room for ideas that there was no room for before. And reminder, prior to that moment, there was no desire for additional room. I'm happy with what I got. I'm full, I'm satisfied. I know what I'm doing. I scream and yell and stomp my feet, and that's the way I get what I want. I don't need anything else. But after this transition, something shifted. It's as if all of that knowledge that she had was compressed, and now she had room for growing in new directions, for getting new ideas and accessing things and combining things. There's another movie that I like a lot. Recognize the scene from this? Yeah. So from Inside Out, one of the things that's really interesting is that Riley, the little girl, goes through a period of transformation herself. She's going through adolescence, which is not easy, while moving across the country, and her parents be giving her less attention, her friends in a distant part of the world, all the things that she's used to and orients to in order to make sense of the world are no longer available to her. She tries to put a happy face on it, joy in her mind, the emotions trying to make sense of the world and doing the best job, while sadness is trying to get a word in edgewise, right? Hey, there's something wrong. I just want to touch some of these memories, and joy's like, no, back off. In the pursuit of all of that, one of the things that happens that's really interesting is that it gets particularly bad and everything starts to fall apart, including the islands of her memory, the places that she makes the most sense of, the things that she orients to and grounds to. Similar to Helen Keller, the old world collapses. It's a different experience, but it makes way for the growth of a new way of understanding the world. A piece of that was really interesting, that is almost missable if you don't pay close attention, is that she also loses her, in her mind, the emotions lose the old dashboard that they used to communicate. Prior to that collapse, one emotion's driving at a time. So they take turns. Joy's driving. Hey, I'm done. Hey, anger, come in, take the wheel. And anger drives for a little while. But there's a scene in the movie where you can see the parents both worried about their little girl, what they can do about the situation she's in. There's something wrong with her. What's going on? But when you look into their minds, all 5 of their emotions are sitting at the control board at the same time. It's a subtle little distinction, and you don't really notice. But in the movie, when she's done, when she actually goes through her crisis and makes the transition, and they realize, oh wow, we're making memories with 2 emotions at once, she gets a new dashboard. And the new dashboard allows 2 emotions to drive at the same time. And it's a really radical shift in the way that we do things. When we grow to maturity, we actually learn to allow our different parts of ourselves to drive simultaneously. We're not just one cohesive whole thing, personality. We actually have a variety of ideas that are coming up all the time. It's fascinating with all of these, the idea that neuroplasticity is something that we have recently learned just how much we grow as adults. It was thought for a while that, pretty much you grow through your childhood, and maybe you're 18, you complete, and then, maybe it's 25 is when you really start to really finalize your growth. And now we're realizing, no, you continue way on past that. In our environment currently, the way that we're structured, if you get a job, after college and you do the same thing for 40 years, there may not be a lot of need for continually to grow. But if you put people in dynamic environments where they need to continually change, their brains will continue to develop and respond to that change. I want to go back to a couple of the points here. That growth and that development is stressful. And it's something that, like I said, I'm not giving you information here so much about how to do this. I'm giving you information about the way that it's experienced. Right? When I go through a situation that is profoundly shifting my perspective, and I go through something like what Riley went through, where I'm rebooting and coming up with another thing, there's a moment of time where the new dashboard is unfamiliar. The compass that I've used to direct myself in my life is no longer as useful as it was. And there can be a period of time like Riley where I have no idea what's going on. I'm almost emotionless as I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And I've had a couple of moments like that. People have talked about that as like the dark night of the soul, right? There's something that occurs in that, and it can be incredibly challenging. So I want to mention this as I'm going to kind of fill your minds with a few ideas that will help you do this, but I want you to be forewarned. You may actually get to the point of actually making a transition and encounter quite a bit of stress or distress around the shift point. It's not a bad thing that happens. It is nice to know that could happen, and how to kind of calm yourself. Meditation and all the things like that can help you. But it's really powerful to know that might be part of what happens. I've heard a lot of people who go through growth experiences and afterwards experience some distress and be really surprised about that. Feel like I've made the wrong choice, I'm heading in the wrong direction. But knowing that that's the case can really help out a lot. The blind philosophers and the elephant. It's one of my favorite metaphors. There's something interesting about that metaphor in particular that stands out to me. This goes back to what I said a moment ago. We're not one monolithic being. When I say I, that's a simplification of who I am. But I have so many parts of myself. And similar to the emotions inside of Riley's brain, we're trying to make sense of the world with these disparate forms of information. There's something interesting about the way that we do this. When we're trying to make information in ways that are beyond our current scope, the parts of us may actually compete with one another. Or when we're working with colleagues and trying to figure out how to solve new problems, it can sometimes occur as kind of a tension. And one of the ways that tension can arise is, I'll give the example of two people trying to teach a class at the same time. So if two people are trying to teach a class at the same time, and they agree on the material to be covered, the goal to be done, the time that they have allotted, they're great, we're on the same page, we'll go right through this. But one of them has a value that says, efficiency is the most important thing. We want to make sure to cover all the material and finish on time. And the other person says, no, I want full participation to be the thing that we do. If somebody has a question, let's spend the time to make sure they make it through that, get their questions answered. Otherwise, we haven't really satisfied the need by the end. Well, you can see that both of them have that perspective from, they want to get to the same goal, but because they're trying to do it a different way, if there's a tension there, where someone does want to stop and answer the questions, and the other person doesn't, there can be a kind of a battle. And it feels like I don't trust you anymore, right? The sense is I no longer can have a sense that I know that we're heading to the same direction. We said we're heading to the same direction, and now we're fighting with each other. But the fight isn't over the goal. The fight is over a value about how to get to that goal. And understanding that that's the case is kind of one of these things where the parts of me can sometimes fight. I can say I don't want to eat cake because I'm going on a diet, but part of me at 3 o'clock in the morning says, hey, that is what I want to do, right? So it's that interesting kind of a distinction. I mentioned in the intro that I was going to do an embodied exercise. So I'd like to do that now to kind of demonstrate this point a little bit. So this is kind of a partner thing. Well, what I'd like to do is have everybody find one partner, and then we're going to stand close to each other and do something else from there. So everybody up for that? You don't have to if you don't want to, but if people don't want to do it, I'll ask for a volunteer so I can show that thing. But if you want to,
we'll
go ahead and find
it.
out. Cool. So this is pretty straightforward. You
be a partner?
All right. So the thing to do is we're going to actually ask you to go ahead and stand up and face each other. And
ladies most
I'm going to ask you to get a little bit closer. Actually, stand close to one another. Have a little bit of room for movement. So if you can stand away from the things or be able. What I'm going to ask you to do, you're actually going to hold hands and lean back. So what I want you to do is stand close enough that you actually can. Your toes are almost touching, right? And then from there, I want you to both lean back and feel the way that you stand together with each other. Feel that tension. Notice if it feels like you're holding tension in your arms, and see if you can let that go. And if it's difficult, see if you can lean back further. See if you can actually find a point of relaxation. If it's difficult, notice the pain point, or notice the pressure points on your feet. All right, and then doing the same thing, come back standing up straight. And notice that it can be a little bit interesting, right? That balance point, finding that, you're actually finding the common center of gravity between the two of you. Neither one of you is driving completely at the same time. There's a level of communication that's happening between you, but there's also a level of communication that's happening within yourself. I don't feel safe. I feel like I'm about to fall. It was non-verbal, so you didn't really have any way to communicate that. But you might have noticed, wow, all my weight's on the ball of my feet. I wonder what happens if I lean back a little bit. And so there's a lot of information that's available there, but we may not be looking for it. We're actually noticing, first and foremost, I don't feel safe. How do I get to safety? And this is a place where those parts of ourselves may actually be in conflict and overriding our ability to ask deeper questions about what's happening. I want to demonstrate one other thing here real quick. David, I'm going to use you, and Layla, I'm going to use both of you. Layla, if y'all could continue to hold hands. So now, there's something else interesting. If I imagined that, hey, I don't feel comfortable going into this exercise, I want a safe space to do this, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I can't fall back. I'm going to stand up against a wall back here so Layla can't fall backwards. Now, if you were to do the exercise again, notice what might happen. I mean, it's obvious, but you'll see. So David starts to lean back, and Layla's pushing back on my hand, but there's nowhere for her to go backwards. She really has no freedom of motion to explore that center of gravity. So that's kind of interesting. It's like she's not safe. She doesn't trust herself to falling backwards, so she really can't continue to hold on, or else she'll be pulled forward. There's another way that this also could be safety, which is imagine that Layla had a harness and she was strapped in so that she couldn't fall forward. And now as David would lean back, she's not going to fall, so she's safe, and David doesn't really have any sense of her point and balance at it as well. It feels as if he's pulling on a wall. And so there's really no communication, there's not the true communication there either. So ways in which we might put in safety mechanisms actually interfere with our ability to touch into the true intelligence of the system as a whole. So thank you. That exercise is really kind of key to understanding. So it's, as a metaphor in the physical world, it actually can tell us a little bit about what's going on in Riley's world, right? This is kind of what's going on when Joy says, hey, I'm driving. Joy, or sadness, step aside. Here, I'm going to draw a circle here, and I want you to stay inside that box. But sadness can't resist. She's compelled to continue to touch the things. And that dissonance that occurs in that moment as they're trying to both simultaneously drive at the same time is actually powerful information about something that that's trying to be perceived that doesn't fit within the model of the way things should be going forward. And it's that key which is actually a powerful way that we might be able to wake ourselves up. If you're familiar with the idea of lucid dreaming, there are ways that you can train yourself. The idea of lucid dreaming is that you become awake and conscious in your dreams. And you could fly or have sex or do all sorts of... You can't change light levels. There are a couple of things you can't do. But there are a lot of things that you can do, and it's an interesting way to explore the psyche. And one of the ways that you can use that information is you can look at your hands during the day and say, am I dreaming? Look at clocks and text, try to read things, try to adjust light levels by flipping light switches. Do that, train yourself during the day to do that, and then at night, tell yourself you're going to do the same exercises in your sleep. And if you remember to do that, hey, I wonder if I'm dreaming, try the light switch. It didn't work. I think I'm dreaming. And now you've opened a portal to that. What I notice is that when I have a value differentiator, like I mentioned with the two people trying to train in the class, or if I'm working with my spouse or my kids and I feel like we're butting heads with each other, there's a righteous indignation that comes up in me. There's something that feels fiercely right about something, and like, you're wrong. And I notice that's the trigger. Oh my God, here's this thing. There's something happening right here that I'm missing something. There's a piece here that I'm not listening to. That fierce indignation is almost protecting the part of me that feels most vulnerable. And it's actually a key for me to see, can I tell what it actually is? Can I actually become objective and notice the subjective experience is coming from a specific belief system, something deep in me in the way that I hold the world to be. In that moment, I can actually piece into and actually feel a little bit of something that I can relax a bit. Like in the exercise doing here, I can't listen, and then all of a sudden I find the thing, and I follow that intuition, and I find the balance point, and now I'm actually experiencing something from a different perspective. The blind man and the elephant is similar to that, and politically, as we look around the world these days, and you can see it's really gotten to this fierce, tense moment where people are looking at Facebook and they have a whole different worldview. People that you used to be able to have conversations with, you can no longer have conversations with, because if you have a difference of opinion about Trump, you're going to go to war, right? And it's like arguing. In the part about it that's fascinating is that as you're talking to them, it's almost as if they're experiencing a completely different world. Like the basis for which they make sense of the world seems to be a different basis than the one we are. Similar to the disagreement between the blind man and the elephant. That, hey, no, this is a wall, no, this is a tail. Whereas the woman up in the top says, you fools, you're all touching the same reality. Well, so what's happening there? What's happening that we're touching the same reality, but we're not perceiving the same reality? Well, it's a partial view of reality. But the thing that's interesting, right, this is why I say I'm not so much giving you information, I'm not telling you how to look at the world. What I'm saying is there's something in you that actually needs to develop, just like a child develops the perspective in order to make sense of the world in a particular way. We have to do that. And then once sufficiently individuated, we actually come back and tie it into the collective. And now we test that against what other people know. And in testing it, we find there are differences. And in those differences, there's a little bit of a tension. And the tension often comes as, I want you to change your opinion. I've worked hard to build my mental model of the world. This is the way that I understand things. And I want to preserve this. I've spent a lot of time and it's important to me. And what's happening in that moment is maybe there's something that I have my belief about the world that's actually blinding me to something that's larger about the world that I want to perceive. And in that moment of actually opening myself up to that, I could see that there's something else that happens. And like with Riley, when that happens, the memories, the key memories, the islands of experience fall apart. They actually collapse. And it's as if, like a snakeskin, it outgrows it. It was supportive up to a certain point. Once it can no longer grow, it's now restrictive. It has to fall away to make way for a new growth. It's an incredibly vulnerable thing to have happen, but if I can trust myself that I'm okay, let me see if I can find a way to let go of my mental models enough to find what else is beyond this. Then I can find a common center of gravity where we're actually both able to perceive something that neither one of us was able to perceive alone. How much time?
21 minutes.
Okay. So I've modified this a little bit. The blind men I've labeled. The labels I've given them are authority, trust, responsibility, accountability, and integrity. And I noticed something interesting about these words. You all know about the one with responsibility. Responsibility from one perspective is I'm responsible. If something goes wrong, it's my fault. I'm to blame for the problem, right? Or I feel the burden of actually maintaining the situation. And then the flip side of that, the ability to respond. Responsibility, the ability to respond, being responsive to a situation. And I noticed for myself that shift actually had a huge difference. When I think I'm responsible for the success of this talk, then I feel like, oh my God, I got to study, I got to know how all this stuff, and better not make a mistake. But if I notice, I'm responsive to the quality of this talk, then I actually am able to look around and say, do people look like they're staying in touch with what I'm saying? Am I going too fast? Is my mouth too dry? But I can actually respond to the circumstances of it rather than say, how did I do at the end, and let me judge my past based on some criteria. I'm actually in the moment being able to look at that. Accountability is interesting, and if I do the same mental trick on accountability that I did with responsibility, the ability to account, what I'm really saying is I'm keeping track, right? I'm not saying, let's find the one throat to choke, you're going to be the one for the whole thing, but I'm really saying, no, we're just keeping track of, hey, somebody said they're going to bring that, did they bring it? Yeah, they did. Okay, well, let's mark that down. Now I'm actually marking the things so that if we say something went wrong, what went wrong? Well, let's look what happened. We said we're going to do these things, and we accounted for these things, and this was the result. And did we miss something, right? So I've given myself the ability to account for the circumstances that happen in between. It's a very different view. The view is kind of, that individuated view is it's all my fault. This is kind of where authority comes from. It's my fault because some external force said what should have happened and I didn't follow that. The external authority said I'm wrong and I feel wrong. I feel responsible, I feel accountable, I feel, the ugliness of that. If I say, wait a minute, authority is actually internal as well. This doesn't happen without our agreement. I'm participating in this agreement. Authority arises in the we space, as well as coming from outside. It comes from in here, and I can feel it. Just as we were leaning back, I could feel what was happening there, right? It's like I can actually test into what's happening. With trust, what's really actually, that's the piece that I'm looking at the most. Listening to the body, listening to my mind and my emotions, listening to what's happening out here, and noticing as it's flowing, does something feel out of alignment? Does something need adjustment? And the last one is integrity. And this one's kind of a fascinating one to me. When I think about integrity, I think about, are you trustworthy? You know, are you the kind of person that I would want to work with? And it's again kind of from that external authority perspective. It's like it's a yes or a no. You are an integrity or not, and if you're not, well, hit the door. But instead, if I think of it like, okay, there's a bridge across a cavern, and I want to walk across it. Does the bridge have the structural integrity to support my weight? And I look at it, so it's made out of toothpicks. I don't think I trust it, right? It doesn't look very strong. Well, it may not look very strong, but the answer isn't, as we often do, to make you think my integrity is higher than it is. Let me put some wallpaper on it and make it look like a steel beam trellis bridge. You know, now it looks strong. That doesn't really solve the problem. It's not going to support my weight going across. I really want to know what the vulnerabilities of that structure are to know if it will support my weight as I'm going across. In the same way that we were doing this with each other, I want to know is my feet solid? Am I going to fall and hurt myself? I want to know where the breaks in integrity are so that I can address those and actually respond to that rather than just pretend that it's okay and discover in the heat of the moment that something needs to happen different. So that, in that way, something really fascinating happens when I'm noticing my behavior in the world, when I'm working on a team or when I'm trying to get something challenging to do, challenging work out. Which is, in that if I'm an individual moving, I'm not balancing with anything else. And from that individual's perspective, the authority and all that being external, I have a way that I interact with the world. And this way that I'm internalizing it, internalizing authority and internalizing the trust, I'm actually going inward and feeling something much deeper. And in that moment when Riley actually trusts her emotions, that she finds that way for her emotions to trust each other and work together, there's a shift that happens that actually has something happen like the blind man and the elephant. If I imagine the elephant on my palm, the blind men are each of my fingers, and they're disagreeing about what they're seeing, but sure that they're right, there's a dissonance that happens. But if I remember, you know what, we're actually connected. These are actually connected through my palm, and I'm actually sensing the same thing. This is just one reality. How do these different perspectives on this one reality come together to give me a one cohesive view of what the world looks like? And from that moment, and almost like in a flash of insight, similar to what happened for Helen Keller, it's like, oh my God, I'm actually seeing something now from another perspective. I'm seeing something from a higher perspective that allows a new way to organize these disparate pieces of information into a cohesive whole. I actually go from seeing a two-dimensional world with each of my eyes to a three-dimensional world where that dissonance between them allows me to see something wider. Now, see a couple of eyes closing and nodding, and I want to say this is interesting because I'm actually charging you up with some really interesting metaphors, and it can be actually a little bit, not to mention the little drowsiness in the afternoon, but you actually can become a little charged up with these things. There's a lot of, in some ways, information, but in some ways it's different from information in a normal sense. I'm gonna close it off with one more thing. So one part is I'm stressing you a little bit with information overload. It's intentional, in the same way that Anne was stressing Helen Keller, giving her almost too much information for the existing model of the world, the way she's making sense to make sense. I'm going to push you a little bit beyond that. So you've probably all seen this, the data, information, knowledge, wisdom pyramid. So something interesting about this is going back to trusting wisdom, back from the beginning. So data is just noise. Data is just the background, all this stuff. When we make sense of it, when we separate out signal from noise, we now have information. We have metadata, one level up from data that actually allows us to distinguish some data from other data, and we actually now make sense of it. In a similar way, knowledge is meta-information. Knowledge are the maps that we have of our mental models, of the way that we understand the paradigms in which we understand the information flows. And it's the level in which we operate. And in the worldview that we have, that we make sense of the world about the way that things should be. When you have a feeling, that's wrong, that person didn't use their signal in driving. We have a model of the way the world should be, and when it doesn't correspond to what we witness or experience, we actually get a little bit upset about it. In the same way, what we're starting to see now is wisdom is meta-knowledge. It's actually the place, like the blind man and the elephant, where these various distinct worldviews and perspectives come together in a non-dual whole. And from that perspective, I actually can see the world in a different way. I have another way of viewing the world than I did before. And the key, remember, that I gave you about how to wake up from the dream, the Maya, the illusion that we're living, that I'm in my own world, is to notice the points in which you're absolutely sure you're right, but it somehow feels like the universe isn't agreeing with you. First time that I caught myself doing that, thinking the world's not right, I'm right, and the world's wrong, I thought, that's a profoundly arrogant view. Like, how did I ever come to think that was even possible? And from there, I learned a little bit of humility to actually lean into, I wonder what I'm missing, because I'm sure the universe hasn't made a mistake. So, I think that's, So, once we get to the point of actually doing that, it actually can be a dance. So the exercise that we did at the beginning, leaning back, you can actually find a way to have fun with that, to actually notice the points where there seems to be tension. I call this the opposable self. And like an opposable thumb, there's something interesting that happens. If there is a lack of sense of continuity, of connection, it comes across as oppositionality, as headbutting, as either or. There's one way right. This is, I know, and we can't find that center because we're not really listening deep enough. But it's not out there. It's not actually changing your mind about it. It's actually listening more deeply, finding the connection point, and balancing into what is here that I'm missing that actually will give me the perspective that I need, the meta perspective that I need, to hear you and me at the same time. And from that place, I actually have the way to trust wisdom. So, I'll open it up to questions, but thank you very much for that. Any questions about any of that? Any thoughts or anything you want to share back? Or?
I just have a question in regards to your intention of doing that. I, for myself, have been charged all day long, and we've spoken on these topics, and I'm completely interested in all of them. But I did find myself, like, sitting here, forcing myself to go, what the heck is going on with me? Because that never happens to me.
Yeah.
It really doesn't. I don't get tired. I don't put energy towards tired. I'm able to transport. But in that moment when you said that, I was actually experiencing that on a strange level that I haven't experienced, where something was, where I was literally like forcing myself, going, this is really strange. This is really, really strange, because I don't experience that on a day-to-day basis. So I just wanted to hear if you, when you said you were doing it intentionally and how you were able to adapt, I just wanted to hear more on that aspect of
I'll say, here's the way I'll answer that, is that I grew up somehow blessed with the ability to kind of hear the negative space, hear the background. And so when teachers at an age of 5-year-old told me you were wrong about this, or ministers told me, nope, that's not the way the world is, this is the way it is, I knew somewhere that I was right, and they may be right too, but I'm not wrong. And so I maintained a way of kind of keeping track of that. And it shows itself up in ways that I watch movies, and so you've seen I've used a lot of metaphors here. I have tons more. But as I have these metaphors, I kind of have them in a storehouse, and so at the right moment they'll come up. And I'll often try to give them to people. So in a conversation, I'll notice, oh wow, here's all this stuff, and I'll give them metaphors, and then notice their eyes getting droopy, and say, I think I'm full, David. I don't think I could take another drop of that. And I notice the same thing happening for me. And I notice, oh, it's that point of challenge. It's that point in which I no longer can quite keep up. My existing models are struggling on overdrive, trying to churn. I mean, it's, if you heard it, if your PC was doing that, you would hear the fan going, it's like burning high cycles, right? Trying to keep up with, how do I process this conflicting information? So there is a way in which I recognize that that happens. And there's actually a benefit and a gift to noticing that, with the ability to relax into it and see if there's something on the other side of that. So it may happen immediately, it may happen over the next couple of days, it may not happen at all. And it may not happen in such a way that you recognize it. But I imagine that you're probably charged up, you have some interesting things. Something will happen probably over the next week, next month or so that will spark this as I think I'm having one of those moments where, you know, I'm having a fight with somebody and I step back for a moment, wow, I wonder how our values are different, right? So that's the intention, is to bring that to the fore.
You know, I notice sometimes I watch this show called Cosmic Disclosures on Gaia TV.
Yeah.
And it's you know, put your belief system aside, but it's about all this disclosure happening from the government and the secret space program. And it's all these concepts about like what it's like living on a base underground, what the replicator that brings your food is like, what the ETs that you're doing healing feelings on it. It's like this whole other world. And I'll be listening, and it's so many concepts out of my range of thinking. I always fall asleep.
Yeah.
And I have to watch it like 4 times because I'm fascinated, but I fall asleep.
Yeah.
So I think there's a phenomenon there where the rational brain just like kind of shuts down.
I think so. I think that's exactly what's happening. I notice it with myself. In fact, it's interesting. I no longer read books because my mind is going on another track, and I always lose track and fall asleep or something. But I listen to audiobooks because I'm driving. I have to pay attention, and if my mind needs to wander, it's processing on another channel, and actually allows me to process a lot of that information in a different way. But yeah, I think you're exactly right that happens a lot. And you're reminding me, the book that I'm actually reading in the physical mode is, how many of you know about Gene Keys? Richard Rudd's book? Yeah. That book, for me, is one of these books that pushes my envelope. In fact, it being my birthday, we're right now in Gene Key 31, which is, God, it's in my background. Gene Key 31 is, it's my life's work. It's arrogance to leadership to humility. And it's a very interesting, I was reading through it just today before I came here and gave this talk, and it's along that same line. The arrogance is the appearance, as I want to be well-liked. As a Leo, that's very definitely true.
Happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you.
I'm a Leo too.
Yeah.
Any other Leos? I see that. Only Leos would say that.
I know, exactly. Very true. But that through transition from leadership to humility, it's really fascinating. And every time I read one of these sections on a Gene Key, I get something new. And it's fascinating to me to see how much is possible to get to that. And as I learn that and integrate it, I've actually had the experience of having mental models that I had somehow internalized into my belly where I can move from that place, and my mind is clear and looks around with a new clarity and perspective to see other things around me. So it's the other book that I'll mention is Stealing Fire by it is a great book, and it's one of the ways that we can use the process of flow. And again, in the very same way, when we're going through that flow process, there can be a kind of a dark night of the soul after you've gone through that flow process. Have you ever done that where you've got it feels like the wings of God are flowing under your the wind of God is flowing beneath your wings, and you're actually getting a lot done. When that ends, it can feel like you've been dropped, right? It can feel like a dark night of the soul. Like all I want to do is go back to that. What happened? I was right there, I was in the pocket, in the zone, and now I'm not. And it's part of that process of actually coming back to integrating all of that and slowing down and allowing that to come forward. But it can feel kind of like a shock in that process of regoing it. Okay, I'm done.
Oh, I had a question.
Okay, question, yeah.
Question is, why this speech and why here?
So this speech, I've been working, as I said, the book is called Trust is a Technology, and it's actually understanding how do I trust myself to engage with the world. Right, I have often felt like we don't give enough credence to the idea that the collective knows something. And it's one of those pieces that I've known we know, but that we don't know how to quite listen to it. When Helen Keller had that insight, I now have language, when that insight came to me, it was, I think we're on the cusp of being able to speak the language of the collective, of actually being able to move like a flock of birds or like a school of fish, singly as a single body, without the limiting hierarchical views of the maps. And with everything that's going on right now with Me Too and with politicians and hierarchy and all of this stuff, it's like, I think that this is the experience of bumping into the limits of the previous paradigm on a massive scale. It feels like it's time for us to find a way to let go of that and see beyond that, beyond the limits of our knowledge to our wisdom. And that challenge of doing that is extremely difficult. But once I know this, it sort of eases that transition so it's not so bad. This group in particular, I went to the Voice for Force and Exit a couple of years ago. Having looked at it, I thought this is something I want to participate in. I went in it and participated this year as well, inviting more people to participate. And when I came to the Voice and Exit Gardens in June and talking to Layla and some others, it was like this material feels more relevant now than it ever has. It feels like it's clear for me coming through, and it feels like it's relevant for the people that are going through it. It's a way of kind of mapping a lot of the challenges that we're going through that allows us to work together a little bit, despite the fact that we're looking at very different models of how to solve some very big problems. So that's why.
I really appreciated the metaphors you used, and there was a moment that it really clicked for me with like the different perspectives and the different parts of the elephant.
Yeah.
And you know, in a partnership or relationship, I'm finding like there's a lot of like triggers that come up that are past programming, and in those moments, like, you know, even more recently, I was reminded like you're only looking at it through one perspective instead of seeing like all the elements that have like built up a character. And the integrity piece is a big one for me. That's the one I struggle with. And even when we did the exercise, I can notice myself like not really finding that center of gravity and being like, I got this, I control this, you know? So is there any practices you would recommend for essentially breaking that programming that has created like a misperception of integrity within myself and others? Like, is there anything I can do to rebuild integrity, or a sense of confidence within integrity?
There is. There are a couple of things. One of the practices that I've been engaged in that's been most beneficial in actually bringing this stuff to light is circling. You may have heard of circling. Monday nights we do it down at VUCA on Monroe at South First from 6:30 to 8:30. I recommend that highly. When I first went to study circling, my intuition said, I've spent so much of my life trying to figure out the right way to be in life, and I think I've gotten about as far as I can. Like, I saw the diminishing returns, how much runway I had left in this life, and I thought, as much as I need to do, I'm not going to do it. I need to somehow listen to my body. That was actually the thought that crossed my mind when I said, I need to find something that will do that. And I recalled seeing something about circling 2 years prior. I thought, I wonder if that would be something that I could use to actually trust myself more deeply. And over the past 2.5 years, it's not been an easy route. It's just like meditation in general. It can take quite a bit of time to do that, but it's one thing that's been very effective for me. There are other ways to do that as well. One of the things that I've learned from that perspective is that the thing, when I look very deeply, and this was an insight that came to me from circling, when I notice that I'm in that defensive mode or that righteous mode, I feel like I'm protecting something. And when I can actually get down to beneath that to see what is it that I'm protecting, I'm surprised, because the thing that I'm protecting is actually invulnerable. The thing that I'm afraid was going to be violated can't possibly be violated. And it's a real surprise to me. So one of the practices that I've engaged in lately is if I feel like I'm embarrassed in a situation, like if you knew something about me that would make you stop liking me or loving me, I check it out and say, hey, I wonder if I can actually share this perspective in a way that I can be with, that doesn't violate my boundaries and doesn't violate your boundaries. And that practice helps deepen it. That's kind of an accelerated way to do that. It feels extremely vulnerable, but I find that I actually relax in doing that. I can find the thing that I think, because it's actually the illusion that it's harmable or that I could be disconnected because of this. When I actually look, it's like, no, actually, that's the most rock solid part of me. That's the part of me that I know the most. And when I can let go of the protection around it, I actually have a lot more maneuverability. Similar to if I tried to hold my back against the wall and tried the ways in which I restrict my motion in order to protect myself, I'm actually making myself more fragile to risk.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think the simple awareness will definitely be like transformative, but in that moment when the trigger happens,
yes,
I mean, it is challenging to get soft and be like, wait, what am I actually looking at? So like, do you breathe into it and just say, okay, I'm going to go deeper into this? Yeah.
I saw Brave raise his hand. I want to let him answer, but what I'll say is, I've been doing this with my wife, and I noticed that when we got into a heated discussion about something, it just like I thought, it snapped me out of this. Oh, wait a minute. We have some difference in values. I don't know what it is, but can we take some time just to kind of recenter, just so that I can find myself in this moment? Because I know we agree, but somehow it feels like we don't. So I want to find what is it about me that feels like I'm being violated or not safe. And in that moment, it was able to de-escalate very quickly, to walk away from it, and for me to call her back and say, I'm so sorry that I reacted that way. And she said, no, it was my fault. And we came back to really looking at what was the thing that we were concerned about. So it doesn't necessarily go away easily, but the practice of it continues to make it easier to do that. Brady, did you have something you want to say?
The refined practice that David is speaking to, the word he keeps using that keeps showing up real strong is notice. He's noticing. And there's actually like a communication skill, language skill called noticing. It's a noticing practice. It's being used in the authentic related community. And it's a very basic emotional intelligence skill that we actually use in a lot of our couples work and individual work as well. The greater the ability we have to notice our sensations, emotions, our thoughts, our judgments, and the more quickly that we can begin to notice that, the more quickly we can find that moment and say, oh man, I feel really defensive right now, or I'm getting really pissed off at you, or why are you being my enemy? And like we can start to question that. And that's like, if you're going to cultivate something, you know, and in meditation you're going to notice sensation or emotion, it's like, can you be that and then articulate it? And if you practice that, that's that foundational skill that will help change all the relationships and all the ways you communicate. From there, it just branches out really exponentially.
Very good. All right, thanks. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.